that are accurate and meaningful and become predictable. Without that, it's been very slow and cumbersome. We've had inaccurate data, we've had sloppy predictions. The genetics community, if they find a 1% association between a SNP and a disease, publish that in the scientific literature. It should never even be published. So we have a system that requires a much higher standard, and we're already starting to work with the FDA because we want to help them establish standards. Jay's been working with it, Greg's been working with them. We want to establish the standard for the world, and we want it to be a high standard. We had this X Prize that, in fact, I think helped spawn this entire industry. After we sequenced the first draft of the human genome, analysts were saying the sequencing industry was dead and there was no value to it whatsoever. My institute started a $500,000 prize, and that's caused people to turn around. And the early guys at Solexa were, they wanted to get that $500,000 prize, and then Peter Diamandis and the X Prize, we raised that to a $10 million prize. I think it helped influence this entire industry. We recently canceled the prize because these guys got so big, they could care less about a $10 million prize. I was able to influence Jay's behavior more by placing a big order with them than I ever could with a prize.
Jay? Yeah, we work a lot with the FDA, and I think they're at the point where they realize the paradigm in the regulatory world has to shift. They're just trying to figure out how to get from where they are to where they need to be, and there's a big leap here. I think in the LDT world, what you're going to see over the next few years is that these oncology diagnostic tests are going to get deployed broadly in the LDT world, and I'd be quite surprised if the regulatory agencies clamp down on those tests, because they already are saving lives, directing treatment, and making huge differences. So I think that would be a highly unpopular move for the FDA to take. However, in the IVD space, where today you have to have large-scale clinical trials that are statistically significant, I think particularly in oncology, the paradigm does have to shift, because many times the variants in genes that might particularly cause a disease or cause a drug reaction may be unknown for that particular patient. And Myriad has shown this in spades. They started with a handful of variants in the BRCA genes, and their database is now 18,000 variants. And so you're going into a world where you don't necessarily know what the variants are, and a clinical trial doesn't. It might get you there in a fraction of the population, but it certainly won't get you there for all. Greg?
No, I think that's well said. This controversy of an IVD versus LDT, a few years ago, the FDA was going to shut down the LDT world. And I think, as Jay says, genetic sequencing, particularly in cancer, has caused them and requires them to completely reevaluate the whole LDT space.
Okay. Guy?
One of the things, one of you made a comment earlier about knowledge is power, and reacting to Greg's comment that in 10 years, for example, we'll bring something back from the dead in terms of extinction. I personally think that in 10 years, these moral issues will be the key things, because the data sets will get so big that a lot of these issues will be resolved in terms of the functionality and utility of using genomic decision-making in medicine. And I think it will devolve to the individual, the married couple, the unmarried couples, the people who are planning their lives forward. And I think looking to China, the consequences become really, really clear. I think what's going to happen